June-Sept 1944, Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. The Panzer IV commander raised his field glasses and scanned the hedgerow 200 metres ahead. His crew had been warned about British armour in the area. They'd been told to expect Cromwells, maybe Churchills, standard British tanks with familiar capabilities, known threats. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What rolled into view made him freeze? The silhouette was wrong. Too long. That barrel extending from the turret measured nearly 17 feet, dwarfing anything he'd seen on Allied tanks. The vehicle bore the unmistakable hull of an American Sherman, but the gun told a different story entirely. Before he could react, before he could order his driver to reverse, before he could transmit a warning, the world exploded. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun, firing armour-piercing, discarding sabot rounds at nearly 3,000 feet per second, punched through his Panzer IV's frontal armour as if it were sheet metal. The projectile's tungsten core, designed specifically to defeat German armour, penetrated 80 millimetres of steel plate and kept travelling, destroying everything in its path. The crew didn't survive long enough to understand what had killed them. Within hours, reports from multiple Panzer units flooded Wehrmacht communications networks. A new British tank had appeared on the battlefield. American Sherman chassis, British 17-pounder gun, lethal combination. Tank commanders who encountered these vehicles and survived used words like devastating, terrifying, unstoppable. By nightfall, German armoured doctrine would fundamentally change across the entire Normandy front. The message transmitted through Panzer Lehr Division, 12th SS Panzer Division, and 21st Panzer Division was explicit and urgent. Identify Sherman variants carrying the long-barreled gun. Avoid direct engagement at all costs. Prioritize these targets above all others, and never assume a Sherman is harmless based on its chassis. The British called it the Sherman Firefly. German tank crews would learn to fear it more than any other Allied armoured vehicle they would face in northwest Europe. This single modification, mounting Britain's most powerful anti-tank gun on America's most reliable tank chassis, created a weapon that nullified Germany's armoured advantage and forced tactical adaptations that would cascade through Wehrmacht operations for the remainder of the war. The story of how this hybrid vehicle came to terrify German panzer crews begins not on the battlefields of Normandy, but in the design bureaus and testing grounds where British engineers confronted a crisis that threatened their entire armoured doctrine. Spring 1943, Lulworth Armoured Fighting Vehicle Gunnery School, Dorset, England, British tank designers, faced a problem that kept senior officers awake at night. German tanks had evolved. The Panzer IV, once considered adequate opposition for British Crusaders and Cromwells, now mounted long-barreled 75mm guns capable of defeating British armour at range exceeding 1,000 metres. Intelligence reports from North Africa confirmed worse developments. Germany had deployed Tiger tanks mounting 88mm guns derived from their legendary anti-aircraft cannon. These vehicles destroyed British armour with impunity, engaging from distances where British tank guns could not respond effectively. The mathematics of armoured warfare had shifted decisively against Britain. The 2-pounder gun that equipped most British tanks in 1941 had proven grossly inadequate. The 6-pounder, introduced as an improvement, still lacked the penetrating power to defeat German heavy armour frontally. Even the 75mm gun being mounted in newer Cromwell tanks struggled against Tigers and the heavily armoured Panther that German factories were beginning to produce in quantity. British tankers knew these statistics intimately because they'd paid for them in blood across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Tank commanders reported watching their armour-piercing rounds bounce harmlessly off German frontal plates, while German guns destroyed British tanks with single shots. The morale impact was devastating. British crews faced combat knowing their weapons were inadequate against enemy armour they were expected to fight. The solution existed: theoretically. British ordnance had developed the 17-pounder anti-tank gun in 1942, specifically designed to counter German heavy armour. This weapon, officially designated Ordnance Quick-Firing 17-pounder, fired a 3-inch projectile with muzzle velocity exceeding 2,800 feet per second. The armour penetration figures were remarkable, capable of defeating 140 millimeters of armour plate at 1,000 meters, range using standard armour-piercing rounds. When firing specialized armour-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, the 17-pounder could penetrate even thicker armour at extended range. This made it theoretically capable of destroying any German tank in service, including the fearsome Tiger, from distances where German guns could not respond. The weapon existed. The problem was putting it into a tank. British tank design philosophy had traditionally favoured smaller turret rings compared to American practice. The Cromwell, Britain's newest cruiser tank entering production, featured a turret ring diameter of 60 inches. The Churchill infantry tank used a similar dimension. These rings were optimised for the 6-pounder and later the 75mm guns they were designed to mount. The 17-pounder, by contrast, was enormous. The gun itself weighed over 1.5 tons. The recoil forces generated when firing required substantial turret volume to accommodate the gun's rearward movement. The breech mechanism alone occupied space equivalent to a large man lying horizontal. British turrets simply could not accommodate this weapon without complete redesign. The only British-designed tank capable of mounting the 17-pounder was the Challenger, a modified Cromwell with an enlarged turret. But Challenger production proved painfully slow. British industry, already stretched manufacturing Cromwells, Churchills, and countless other weapon systems, could not produce Challengers in quantities sufficient to equip armoured regiments. By early 1943, it became clear that Challengers would never be available in adequate numbers before the planned invasion of France. Tank crews would face German armour with inadequate weapons unless an alternative could be found quickly. Major George Witheridge of the Tank Design Department examined the problem from a different angle. British factories could not produce enough tanks with turret rings large enough to accommodate the 17-pounder. But American factories were producing thousands of Sherman tanks with substantially larger turret rings than any British design. The Sherman M4 featured a turret ring diameter of 69 inches, 9 inches larger than British tanks. This seemingly modest difference translated into dramatically greater internal volume. Could that extra space accommodate the 17-pounder? The question was worth investigating, particularly because Britain was receiving thousands of Shermans through Lend-Lease, with the vehicles arriving faster than British industry could produce domestic designs. Initial calculations suggested it might be possible. Barely. The 17-pounder would fit if every possible concession was made to save space. The gun would have to be rotated 90 degrees from its normal orientation, with the gun layer sitting on the left side of the breech, rather than the right. The radio operator position in the hull would need to be eliminated, reducing crew from 5 to 4. Turret ammunition stowage would be severely limited. The installation would be cramped, awkward, and unconventional. But it might work. In January 1943, workshop personnel at the Department of Tank Design received authorization to modify a single Sherman tank as proof of concept. They selected an M4A4, a version with the longer Sherman hull, powered by the Chrysler multibank engine. Engineers measured every dimension inside the turret, calculating clearances for the gun's recoil path, breech operation, and crew positions. The 17-pounder gun designated for installation was actually a modified version. Standard 17-pounders used a muzzle brake to reduce recoil forces. British designers removed the muzzle brake to avoid creating a distinctive silhouette that would make Fireflies immediately recognizable to German gunners. Without the brake, recoil forces increased, but the turret's recoil mechanism was strengthened to compensate. The gun mounting required custom fabrication. Engineers designed a mantlet that mated the 17-pounder's trunnions to the Sherman's turret face. The installation demanded precision machining to ensure proper alignment and secure mounting. Workspace inside the turret became extraordinarily tight. The loader worked in conditions that would have been unacceptable in peacetime, but were considered acceptable given combat necessity. The radio operator's position in the hull, normally occupied by a fifth crew member, was eliminated entirely. His radio equipment was relocated to the turret bustle, mounted behind the commander and gun layer. This freed up hull space for additional ammunition stowage, though even with this modification, the Firefly could carry only 77 17-pounder rounds compared to the 90-plus round standard Shermans carried for their 75mm guns. By February 1943, the prototype conversion was complete. The modified Sherman rolled out for firing trials at the Lulworth Ranges. The test crew loaded a standard armor-piercing round, aimed at a target plate positioned 1,000 meters downrange, and fired. The gun performed flawlessly. Recoil was manageable. The turret absorbed the forces without structural damage. The armor-piercing round punched through test armor that represented German tank frontal protection. Subsequent tests with armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition demonstrated even more impressive penetration. The specialized projectile, consisting of a tungsten penetrator wrapped in a light aluminum sabot that separated after leaving the barrel, achieved muzzle velocities approaching 3,000 feet per second. At combat range, this gave the weapon capability to defeat any known German armor, including the Tiger's frontal plate. Senior British officers observing these trials recognized immediately that this hybrid vehicle solved their anti-tank crisis. The Firefly could destroy German heavy armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. It could engage Panthers and Tigers with confidence. Most importantly, it could be produced quickly by converting existing Sherman tanks rather than waiting for British industry to manufacture entirely new vehicles. The Royal Armoured Corps issued orders in March 1943. Sherman Firefly conversions would begin immediately. British workshops would modify arriving Sherman tanks, prioritizing the longer-hulled variants that provided marginally more internal space. Each armoured regiment would receive a mix of standard Shermans and Fireflies, typically organising with 3 standard Shermans and 1 Firefly per troop, the British equivalent of an American platoon. This organisation reflected both production limitations and tactical doctrine. Converting Shermans to Firefly configuration required skilled labour and time that limited conversion rates. Britain could not convert every Sherman, but didn't need to. The Firefly's role was specialised: engage and destroy German heavy armour at extended range, while standard Shermans provided general fire support, engaged lighter targets, and supported infantry operations. By summer 1943, Firefly production reached meaningful numbers. The first conversions equipped training units where crews learned to operate the modified vehicle. The cramped turret required different crew procedures compared to standard Shermans. The loader's job became significantly more difficult. 17-pounder ammunition was heavy, awkward, and occupied considerable space. Loading speed suffered compared to smaller caliber guns. The gun layer, positioned on the left side of the breech instead of the customary right side, had to retrain muscle memory for every operation. The commander's position remained relatively unchanged, though his field of vision was somewhat restricted by the larger gun breech. The deleted radio operator position meant the driver lost his hull-mounted machine gun assistant, though this was considered an acceptable trade-off for the Firefly's anti-tank capability. Tactical doctrine developed around the Firefly's strengths and limitations. These vehicles would not lead advances or engage in close combat with infantry. Their role was to provide anti-tank overwatch, positioned where their superior range could dominate enemy armour approaches. Standard Shermans would handle closer engagements while Fireflies hung back, scanning for German heavy tanks and ready to engage at extended distances. British crews training on Fireflies quickly recognised the vehicle's advantages. The 17-pounder gun gave them a weapon that could reliably defeat any German tank they might encounter. The psychological impact was enormous. Tank commanders who had faced Tigers and Panthers in inadequate Crusaders or Cromwells now had a weapon that evened the odds. For the first time since 1942, British tank crews felt they had equipment matching enemy capabilities. The disadvantages were equally apparent. The Firefly was heavy, tipping the scales at over 32 tons compared to roughly 30 tons for standard Shermans. This extra weight, combined with the same powertrain, reduced mobility slightly. The high-velocity 17-pounder gun, while devastating against armour, was less effective than the Sherman's 75mm gun when firing high-explosive rounds against soft targets. The Firefly was optimised for a specific mission: killing enemy tanks. By December 1943, British armoured regiments preparing for the invasion of France were receiving Fireflies in increasing numbers. The 21st Army Group, commanded by General Bernard Montgomery and designated for the assault on Normandy, would cross the English Channel with hundreds of these hybrid vehicles, distributed throughout its armoured formations. German intelligence remained largely unaware of the Firefly's existence. The vehicle looked like a standard Sherman from most angles. The gun barrel, while noticeably longer than the 75mm Sherman, did not create an obviously different silhouette at distance. British security regarding the conversion program remained tight. No Fireflies were deployed to Italy, where they might have been captured and examined before D-Day. The Germans would learn about Fireflies the hard way, through direct combat experience. Their education would begin on the morning of June 6, 1944, when British armoured units rolled onto the beaches of Normandy carrying weapons that German intelligence had not predicted and German Panzer doctrine had not prepared to counter. June 6, 1944, Sword Beach, Normandy. The Sherman Fireflies of the Staffordshire Yeomanry rolled off their landing craft into 3 feet of seawater, their crews already scanning the shoreline for German positions. These were among the first Fireflies to touch French soil, part of the 27th Armoured Brigade supporting the British 3rd Infantry Division's assault on the eastern flank of the invasion beaches. The Firefly crews had trained for months, but training could not replicate the chaos of actual combat. Artillery fire churned the beach, German machine guns swept the sand. Disabled vehicles burned where they'd been hit. Yet the Fireflies pressed forward, their priority clear. Reach the assembly areas inland, link up with infantry units, and prepare to counter the inevitable German armoured response. By nightfall on D-Day, British forces had established a foothold 6 miles deep. The Staffordshire Yeomanry had pushed beyond Hermanville, taking casualties but maintaining unit cohesion. Their Fireflies remained operational, engines running smoothly despite the saltwater crossing and rough handling during landing. The American Sherman chassis proved as reliable as promised, while the British 17-pounder guns awaited their first engagement against German armour. That engagement would not wait long. German commanders, initially uncertain where the main Allied effort would fall, began shifting armoured reserves toward Normandy. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, stationed near Lisieux, received orders to counterattack toward Caen. This division, formed in 1943 from Hitler Youth volunteers and veteran Waffen-SS cadre from the Eastern Front, was equipped with the latest Panzer IVs mounting long 75mm guns and a battalion of Panthers. The Panthers represented Germany's most advanced medium tank in widespread service. Introduced after the shock of encountering Soviet 34 tanks at Kursk, the Panther mounted a powerful 75mm Quake 42 gun with exceptional penetration characteristics. Its sloped frontal armour, 80mm thick at 55 degrees from vertical, could defeat most Allied anti-tank weapons at typical combat range. German crews considered Panthers nearly invincible when properly employed. June 7th brought the first major clash. Elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division, advancing toward British positions north of Caen, encountered reconnaissance elements of the 27th Armoured Brigade near the village of Combes-en-Plaine. The German column included approximately 20 Panthers from the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, supported by Panzer Grenadiers in half-tracks. The British position included 4 troops of Shermans, a mix of standard 75mm variants and Fireflies, positioned for mutual support. The terrain favoured defence. British tanks occupied hull-down positions behind hedgerows and stone walls, presenting minimal target profiles while commanding excellent fields of fire across open farmland. The German advance, confident and aggressive, followed doctrine developed on the Eastern Front, where Panthers routinely dominated Soviet armour through superior optics, crew training, and gun performance. The Panther Company commander, an experienced officer with 2 years of combat on the Russian front, expected to engage British Cromwells or standard Shermans, neither of which posed serious threats to his heavily armoured vehicles at combat range. The lead Panther crested a low rise approximately 1,200 metres from British positions. The commander scanned through his excellent Zeiss optics, identifying multiple enemy tanks in defensive positions ahead. He prepared to issue fire orders, confident his gunner could engage accurately at this range, while British guns lacked the reach to respond effectively. The Firefly crew spotted the Panther simultaneously. The gun layer, Trooper James Mitchell, traversed smoothly onto target while calling range and target description. The commander confirmed the target, gave the fire order. Mitchell centered his crosshairs on the Panther's glacis plate that sloped frontal armor German crews, trusted absolutely, and fired. The armor-piercing discarding sabot round left the 17-pounder's muzzle at 2,950 feet per second. The tungsten penetrator, weighing just under 4 pounds but travelling at extreme velocity, struck the Panther's frontal armour with kinetic energy exceeding any standard Allied tank gun. The sloped armour, designed to deflect conventional rounds, could not defeat the penetrator's concentrated impact. The projectile punched through 80 millimetres of steel plate as if it were tin, continued through the transmission housing, and detonated stored ammunition in the hull. The Panther exploded, turret lifting off its ring before crashing back down at an angle. The crew died instantly, never knowing what had killed them. The second Panther, trailing 300 metres behind, attempted to reverse after watching the lead vehicle explode. Another Firefly engaged from a different angle. This round struck the Panther's side armour, much thinner than frontal protection, and penetrated easily. The tank burst into flames. The crew bailed out, running for cover through machine gun fire. Within 90 seconds, 2 Panthers had been destroyed at ranges where their own guns could barely identify specific British tank types. The remaining German armour halted, commanders frantically scanning for the weapons engaging them. The psychological shock was profound. Panthers were supposed to be invulnerable frontally. Soviet 76mm guns could not penetrate Panther frontal armour at these ranges. American 75mm Sherman guns could not, yet 2 Panthers had just been destroyed by frontal hits in under 2 minutes. The German company commander ordered smoke and withdrawal. His remaining Panthers reversed behind cover, while self-propelled artillery laid smoke screens. The counterattack, launched with confidence that German armour superiority would prevail, had been stopped cold by British anti-tank fire of unexpected power. The Germans had encountered their first Fireflies without knowing such weapons existed. After-action reports from the 12th SS Panzer Division that evening reflected confusion and concern. Multiple Panther crews reported being engaged by enemy tanks at range exceeding 1,000 metres with devastating effect. Frontal armour penetrations, previously considered impossible against Allied weapons, had occurred repeatedly. Tank commanders described seeing Sherman-type vehicles, but could not reconcile standard Sherman capabilities with the observed armour penetration. Wehrmacht intelligence officers compiled these reports with growing alarm. If the Allies had deployed a new anti-tank weapon capable of defeating Panther frontal armour, it represented a fundamental shift in armoured warfare balance. The technical characteristics suggested a gun with muzzle velocity and penetration far exceeding known Allied tank weapons. But what gun? Mounted on what vehicle? The answer came 3 days later, when German infantry overran a damaged Firefly that had thrown a track near Tilly-sur-Seulles. The crew had attempted to destroy the vehicle before withdrawing, but had only partially succeeded. The turret remained intact enough for German technical personnel to identify the gun. Wehrmacht Ordnungsexpert measured the barrel, examined the breech mechanism, and compared dimensions with intelligence files on Allied weapons. The identification was certain. British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, the same weapon German forces had encountered in towed versions in North Africa and Italy. But intelligence had never reported this gun mounted in a tank turret, particularly not in an American Sherman chassis. The implications were immediately apparent to every German officer who read the assessment. The British had successfully mated their most powerful anti-tank gun with America's most reliable tank chassis, creating a hybrid vehicle that combined the best attributes of both nations' industrial output. The captured Firefly was photographed extensively. These images were distributed to Panzer units across Normandy, with explicit identification guidance. The key recognition feature was the gun barrel length, noticeably longer than standard Sherman armament. Crews were instructed to measure apparent barrel length against the hull length. A barrel extending well beyond the hull front indicated a Firefly variant carrying the 17-pounder gun. Tactical directives followed immediately. Fireflies were to be engaged as priority targets, before standard Shermans, before infantry positions, before artillery. If a Firefly was identified in a British tank formation, it must be destroyed first to eliminate the long-range anti-tank threat. German doctrine explicitly stated that allowing a Firefly to survive meant accepting casualties to German armour that could otherwise be avoided. These orders reflected hard calculations about comparative capabilities. A standard Sherman with a 75mm gun could damage German tanks at close range, but struggled to penetrate frontal armour beyond 500 metres. Crews could counter standard Shermans through superior gunnery, advantageous positioning, and the Panther's armour superiority. The Firefly eliminated all these advantages. It could penetrate Panther frontal armour at range, where German guns could barely identify it as a target. It could destroy Tigers from positions where Tigers could not effectively respond. The Firefly, uniquely among Allied tanks, could win gunnery duels through pure ballistic superiority. SS Obersturmbannführer Kurt Meyer, commanding the 12th SS Panzer Division, issued standing orders throughout his unit. All tank commanders would be briefed on Firefly identification. All crews would prioritize these vehicles in any engagement. Failure to identify and engage. Fireflies first was considered a tactical error that endangered the entire formation. These orders filtered through Wehrmacht armoured units across Normandy. The Panzer Lehr Division, 21st Panzer Division, and later arriving SS Panzer divisions all received similar directives. Within 2 weeks of D-Day, every German tank crew in Normandy knew about Fireflies and feared them accordingly. The British, meanwhile, recognized that German targeting priority made Firefly survival increasingly difficult. Crews reported being engaged immediately upon revealing their positions, often drawing fire from multiple German tanks simultaneously. The distinctive long gun barrel, necessary for the weapon's ballistic performance, made Fireflies conspicuous and prioritized targets. British armoured regiments adapted their tactics accordingly. Firefly crews received orders to camouflage their distinctive gun barrels with foliage, paint patterns, or any material that broke up the silhouette. Some crews painted false muzzle brakes near the barrel's midpoint, creating the illusion of a shorter gun from certain angles. Others shortened the visual appearance by wrapping the barrel in canvas or burlap. The most controversial adaptation involved operational deployment. Firefly commanders were instructed to position their vehicles behind standard Shermans whenever possible, using the more numerous 75mm variants as a screen. Standard Shermans would draw German fire, revealing enemy positions, while Fireflies remained concealed and engaged once targets were identified. This tactic preserved Firefly survivability, but placed additional risk on standard Sherman crews, who became, effectively, bait for German gunners. June 13th brought the battle that would define Firefly reputation among German tankers. Near the village of Villers-Bocage, elements of the 7th Armoured Division, the famous Desert Rats, advanced eastward as part of a flanking movement intended to envelop Caen. The British column included the 4th County of London Yeomanry, equipped with a mix of Cromwell cruiser tanks and Sherman Fireflies. German intelligence had identified this advance. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, commanding a Tiger tank from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, positioned his tank and several supporting vehicles to ambush the British column. Wittmann was already a legend among German tank crews, credited with over 100 tank kills on the Eastern Front. His tactical skill, combined with the Tiger's formidable capabilities, made him one of Germany's most effective armoured warfare practitioners. The ambush initially succeeded beyond expectations. Wittmann's Tiger emerged from concealment and systematically destroyed the lead elements of the British column. Cromwell tanks, unable to penetrate Tiger armour, died rapidly. Half-tracks and support vehicles burned. Within minutes, Wittmann had destroyed over a dozen British vehicles, creating chaos throughout the column. But the column included 3 Fireflies positioned further back. As Wittmann's Tiger continued its devastating assault, moving through the stalled British formation, one Firefly crew achieved a firing position. The gun layer, tracking the moving Tiger through his sight, led the target appropriately and fired. The round struck the Tiger's side armour at approximately 700 metres range. Tiger side armour, measuring 80 mm compared to the 100 mm frontal plate, could not withstand 17-pounder armour-piercing discarding sabot ammunition at this range. The penetrator punched through, detonating ammunition inside. Wittmann's Tiger, seemingly invincible moments before, exploded catastrophically. Wittmann and his crew died instantly, killed by a weapon they had not anticipated facing. The remaining German vehicles, including several Panzer IVs supporting Wittmann, withdrew immediately. Without the Tiger's overwhelming firepower and Wittmann's tactical genius, the ambush could not be sustained against British forces that included Firefly anti-tank capability. The battle at Villers-Bocage, though ultimately a German tactical victory given the casualties inflicted, demonstrated that even Tigers crewed by Germany's best tankers were vulnerable to Firefly fire. Wittmann's death resonated through German armoured units. If a Tiger commanded by one of Germany's most skilled tank aces could be destroyed by a Firefly, then no German tank was safe. The psychological impact compounded the tactical threat. German tank commanders, already dealing with Allied air superiority and artillery dominance, now faced ground-based anti-tank weapons that could defeat their best armour. Wehrmacht tactical reports from late June and early July 1944 document the operational impact. Panther and Tiger crews reported modifying their tactics specifically to counter Firefly threats. German tanks would not advance across open ground where Fireflies might engage at extended range. Commanders insisted on closed terrain, villages, forests, anywhere that limited sightlines and forced engagements at range, where German armour's superior optics and crew training provided advantages. This tactical adaptation had strategic consequences. German armour, forced into close terrain to avoid Firefly engagement, lost mobility and flexibility. British and Canadian forces could predict German defensive positions and bring overwhelming artillery and air power to bear. The Firefly, by forcing German tactical changes, contributed to Wehrmacht operational paralysis across the Normandy front. Production data illustrated the Firefly's impact through British priorities. By July 1944, British workshops were converting every available Sherman to Firefly configuration as fast as skilled labour and gun availability permitted. The original plan called for 1 Firefly per troop. Actual deployment exceeded this ratio in many units as commanders demanded more of the only Allied tank that could reliably engage German heavy armour. Total Firefly production would eventually reach approximately 2,100 vehicles by war's end. This represented a substantial portion of Sherman tanks allocated to British and Commonwealth forces. The conversion programme consumed resources and labour that might have gone toward purely British tank designs, but the tactical necessity was undeniable. Fireflies were the only effective counter to German heavy armour that British forces possessed in adequate numbers. German technical intelligence continued analysing captured Fireflies throughout the summer. Reports detailed every aspect of the conversion, noting the ingenious use of available space, the compromises necessary to fit such a large gun in the Sherman turret, and the resulting vehicle's capabilities. These assessments concluded uniformly that the Firefly represented a significant threat that negated German armour advantages whenever it appeared on the battlefield. One captured German document, a tactical assessment from the 2nd Panzer Division, dated August 19, 1944, provided explicit guidance for engaging British armoured formations. The document stated, "Sherman tanks with extended gun barrels must be considered the primary threat. These vehicles carry British 17-pounder anti-tank guns, capable of defeating Panther and Tiger frontal armour at range exceeding 1,500 metres. Crews must identify and engage these variants before engaging standard Shermans. Failure to eliminate Firefly variants will result in unacceptable casualties to German armour." This represented a complete reversal of pre-invasion expectations. German doctrine in early 1944 had assumed that superior German armour, properly employed, would dominate Allied tanks through technical advantage. The Firefly destroyed that assumption. German tanks were no longer technically superior. They were vulnerable to a weapon that could be deployed in substantial numbers and operated by adequately trained British crews. The summer battles in Normandy provided countless examples of Firefly effectiveness. On June 26th, near the village of Chaux, a single Firefly from the 23rd Hussars engaged and destroyed 3 Panthers in rapid succession, firing from a hull-down position at range exceeding 1,000 metres. The Panthers, advancing across open farmland, had no opportunity to identify and return fire before being destroyed. On July 8th, during Operation Charnwood, the assault on Caen, Firefly tanks from multiple regiments provided overwatch as British infantry advanced through rubble-filled streets. German armour attempting to counter-attack through the urban terrain found itself engaged by Fireflies, positioned in prepared positions with excellent sight lines. Multiple Panthers and Panzer IVs were destroyed in exchanges, where German crews never achieved effective return fire. On July 18th, during Operation Goodwood, the massive British armoured offensive east of Caen, Fireflies played a crucial role despite heavy British tank loss overall. German defensive positions, carefully prepared with anti-tank guns and armour in depth, destroyed hundreds of British tanks, but Firefly crews, operating more cautiously and engaging from longer ranges, achieved disproportionately high kill ratios. British after-action reports noted that Fireflies, though comprising roughly 20% of tank strength, accounted for over 40% of confirmed German armour kills during the operation. These statistics reflected tactical reality. Standard Shermans and Cromwells could destroy German tanks at close range or through flank shots, but faced significant disadvantages in frontal engagements beyond 500 metres. Fireflies could engage and destroy German armour at any practical combat range, from any angle that allowed a shot. This capability meant Firefly crews could select engagement range favouring their weapon, while avoiding ranges where German advantages in armour and optics dominated. German tank crew accounts from this period, collected through prisoner interrogations and post-war interviews, consistently describe Fireflies as the most feared Allied armoured vehicle. A Panther commander captured near Falaise in August stated, "We were not afraid of regular Shermans. We could defeat them through better positioning and gun performance. But the long-barreled Shermans, those were different. They could kill us from distances where we could barely see them. When we saw one, we had to destroy it immediately or withdraw. There was no other option." A Tiger commander from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, captured in July after his vehicle was disabled by Firefly fire, described his experience. "I had fought on the Russian front for daft 18 months. I had survived Kursk. I thought I understood armoured combat. Then I encountered British tanks that could penetrate my Tiger's frontal armour from over a kilometre away. It was impossible, but it happened. After that, every engagement was different. We could not assume our armour would protect us. We had to destroy the long-barreled Shermans first, but they were positioned to make that difficult. These accounts reveal the psychological dimension of Firefly impact. German tank crews had relied on technical superiority to offset Allied numerical advantages. The Tiger's reputation for invincibility, the Panther's sloped frontal armour, these were not just engineering achievements, but psychological weapons that sustained German morale despite deteriorating strategic circumstances. The Firefly undermined that psychological foundation by proving that German armour could be defeated by Allied weapons deployed in substantial numbers. The operational impact extended beyond individual engagements. German armoured units in Normandy faced constant attrition that could not be replaced. Every Panther destroyed by Firefly, fire represented a loss Germany's strained industrial capacity could not quickly replace. By contrast, Sherman loss could be replaced within days through the massive logistical apparatus supporting Allied operations. British workshops in England continued converting Shermans to Firefly configuration, maintaining a steady flow of these weapons to frontline units. By August 1944, as Allied force broke out of Normandy and began the pursuit across France, German armoured strength had been catastrophically reduced. The Panzer divisions that had counterattacked on D-Day with hundreds of tanks were reduced to company-sized remnants. Multiple factors contributed to this attrition: Allied air power, artillery, mechanical breakdowns, and fuel shortages. But Firefly anti-tank capability ensured that German armour, when it did engage, faced weapons that could destroy it at ranges where German advantages meant nothing. September 1944, the Netherlands. German armoured units, retreating across northwest Europe after the collapse in Normandy, attempted to establish defensive lines along canal networks and river barriers. These positions, if properly held, could delay Allied advances and buy time for Germany to rebuild shattered divisions. The terrain favoured defence, with numerous water obstacles limiting Allied armour mobility and creating natural choke points. British armoured regiments, pursuing through Belgium and into Holland, found their Fireflies invaluable in these constrained environments. German tanks, forced to defend fixed positions along predictable routes, could be engaged methodically by Firefly crews who positioned their vehicles for maximum advantage. The 17-pounder's range allowed British gunners to destroy German armour from positions beyond effective return fire. Near the town of Hechtel, Belgian force, supported by British armour, encountered elements of the 107th Panzer Brigade, a hastily formed unit equipped with a mix of Panther tanks and assault guns. The Germans had positioned their armour to cover a bridge crossing, creating a killing zone for any Allied attempt to force the obstacle. Standard British reconnaissance would have been costly, but the regiment included 6 Fireflies distributed across its squadrons. The Firefly crews, working with forward observers, identified German tank positions through careful observation and began systematic engagement at ranges exceeding 1,500 metres. The Panthers, hull down behind berms and positioned for close-range defence, found themselves under accurate fire from distances where their own guns could not achieve comparable precision. Within 3 hours, 4 Panthers had been destroyed or disabled without British tanks entering the German engagement zone. This pattern repeated across the autumn campaign. German defensive positions, carefully prepared to maximise German armour advantages, were systematically defeated by Firefly long-range fire. Wehrmacht tactical reports from this period show increasing frustration with the inability to counter British 17-pounder equipped tanks at extended range. A September 23 report from the 116th Panzer Division noted, "Enemy long-barreled Sherman variants engage our positions from range where our return fire is ineffective. Standard defensive tactics proving inadequate against these weapons. Recommend concentration of anti-tank gun batteries to provide suppressive fire, forcing enemy armour to maintain greater distances from our positions." This recommendation revealed the depth of German tactical problems. The Firefly had forced Wehrmacht commanders to dedicate scarce anti-tank gun resources specifically to counter British tank destroyers, resources that might otherwise have been employed against infantry or standard Allied armour. The Firefly's existence warped German tactical planning, forcing allocation decisions that reduced effectiveness across all mission types. October brought Operation Market Garden, the ambitious Allied airborne operation intended to seize bridges across Dutch rivers and create a corridor into northern Germany. British armoured units, including substantial Firefly concentrations, advanced up the single highway toward Arnhem, engaging German positions that attempted to cut the narrow corridor. The Fireflies proved essential in defeating German armour, attempting to sever British supply lines. Near the village of Wegel, German forces launched coordinated attacks against the exposed corridor, employing Panthers and tank destroyers in attempts to cut the highway. British Fireflies, positioned in overwatch along the route, engaged German armour as it attempted to close with the objective. The long-range fire, delivered from prepared positions, destroyed multiple German vehicles before they could effectively engage the supply columns they targeted. Though Market Garden ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives, the Firefly's tactical performance remained consistently effective. German after-action reports noted that British anti-tank capability, particularly the 17-pounder equipped Shermans, prevented German armour from exploiting opportunities that might otherwise have collapsed the Allied corridor days earlier than actually occurred. The autumn battles provided additional data on Firefly combat performance that British ordnance analysed carefully. Kill ratios favoured Fireflies substantially over standard Sherman variants. A typical Firefly achieved approximately 3.5 confirmed kills per loss, compared to roughly 1.2 for standard 75mm Shermans. This disparity reflected both the weapon's superior capability and the more cautious employment doctrine that kept Fireflies in overwatch positions, rather than close assault roles. Crew survivability also exceeded standard Sherman rates. Fireflies, engaging from longer ranges and positioned for defensive advantage, suffered fewer catastrophic hits than Shermans conducting close-range combat. When Fireflies were lost, they tended to be destroyed by anti-tank guns, artillery, or long-range German tank fire rather than close-range armour penetrations that killed crews instantly. This survivability advantage meant experienced Firefly crews remained in combat longer, accumulating expertise that further improved their effectiveness. German prisoner interrogations from late 1944 revealed the psychological toll of facing Fireflies repeatedly. A Panther commander from the 9th SS Panzer Division, captured near Arnhem, described his experience. Every advance, every defensive position, we had to account for the long-barreled Shermans. They were not numerous, but they were always positioned where they could do maximum damage. We learned to scan for them first, before engaging other targets. But finding them was difficult. They looked like standard Shermans until they fired, and by then, it was often too late. This testimony revealed an important aspect of Firefly tactical effectiveness. British efforts to camouflage the distinctive gun barrel, combined with careful positioning among standard Shermans, meant German crews often could not identify Fireflies until after they engaged. The first indication of a Firefly's presence was frequently the arrival of 17-pounder armour-piercing shot travelling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, giving German crews no opportunity to react. The winter of 1944–45 brought new challenges as both sides confronted deteriorating weather and limited mobility. German force, increasingly desperate as Allied pressure intensified, launched the Ardennes offensive in December, attempting to split Allied armies and recapture the port of Antwerp. This offensive, Germany's last major armoured operation in the West, would provide the final large-scale test of Firefly capabilities against concentrated German armour. British forces, positioned on the northern shoulder of the German penetration, included substantial Firefly concentrations within the 30th Corps and adjacent formations. As German armoured spearheads pushed westward, attempting to widen the penetration and prevent Allied reinforcement, they encountered British positions anchored by Firefly anti-tank capability. Near the town of Houghton, elements of the British 29th Armoured Brigade, including multiple Firefly troops, established defensive positions covering approaches to the Arth River. German forces, attempting to secure crossings, committed Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division in attacks against these positions. The Fireflies, positioned on high ground with excellent observation, engaged advancing German armour at extreme range. The battle lasted 2 days, with German forces making repeated attempts to force the river crossings. Multiple Panthers were destroyed at ranges exceeding 1,800 metres, distances where their own guns could achieve hits but lacked sufficient remaining kinetic energy to penetrate British armour consistently. The Fireflies, firing from prepared positions with carefully ranged firing data, achieved first-round hit probabilities that German crews found devastating. A captured German tank company commander, interrogated after the battle, stated, "We knew British positions contained the long-barreled Shermans. We attempted to suppress them with artillery before advancing, but they were well positioned and difficult to locate precisely. When we advanced, they engaged immediately at ranges where we could not effectively return fire. We lost 6 Panthers in the first 30 minutes. The attack was impossible to sustain." This engagement exemplified Firefly tactical employment at its most effective. Positioned defensively, with good observation and prepared firing data, Fireflies could defeat German armour attacks through pure ballistic superiority. The 17-pounders' range advantage, combined with British crew training and sound tactical positioning, created situations where German armour faced unacceptable casualties regardless of their skill or determination. The Ardennes fighting also revealed Firefly limitations in fluid combat. When British forces counterattacked to reduce the German salient, Fireflies advancing across unfamiliar terrain faced the same challenges as standard Shermans: vulnerability to prepared German anti-tank positions, difficulty identifying targets in close terrain, and exposure to flanking fire. Several Fireflies were lost to German tank destroyers and towed anti-tank guns during these advances, demonstrating that the weapons' advantages diminished significantly when employed offensively in close terrain. British doctrine evolved to reflect these lessons. Fireflies were optimization weapons, most effective when employed from prepared positions against identifiable targets at extended range. They were not breakthrough weapons or pursuit vehicles. Their role was providing anti-armour overwatch while standard Shermans, Cromwells, and infantry conducted close combat. This specialization meant Firefly crews required different training and mindset compared to standard tank crews. By January 1945, as Allied forces prepared for final offensives into Germany, the Firefly had been in combat for 7 months. British Ordnance assessed its performance as exceptional within its designed role. The vehicle had proven capable of defeating any German armour at practical combat range, had demonstrated reliable mechanical performance inheriting the Sherman's automotive excellence, and had achieved kill ratios substantially exceeding other British armoured vehicles. Production continued at maximum sustainable rates. British workshops in England and on the continent converted arriving Shermans as quickly as 17-pounder guns became available. The limiting factor was gun production rather than vehicle availability or conversion capacity. British industry, manufacturing 17-pounders for both towed anti-tank use and tank mounting, could not produce enough guns to convert every available Sherman. This production limitation meant Firefly distribution remained concentrated in frontline armoured regiments, where their impact was greatest. Support units, training formations, and reserve forces received standard Shermans, while frontline combat units received disproportionate Firefly allocations. By February 1945, some British armoured regiments fielded Firefly percentages approaching 30% of total tank strength, well above the original planning figure of 25%. German defensive doctrine in the war's final months explicitly addressed Firefly threats. A document from 3rd Panzer Army dated February 19, 1945, provided detailed recognition, guidance, and engagement priorities. The document included silhouette comparisons showing Firefly gun barrel length versus standard Sherman armament, stated that Fireflies must be engaged before other Allied tanks, regardless of tactical situation, and recommended immediate withdrawal if Firefly positions could not be quickly neutralized. This last recommendation represented complete abandonment of earlier German doctrine that emphasized aggressive counterattack. By early 1945, German commanders understood that engaging British formations, containing Fireflies from exposed positions, meant accepting catastrophic loss. Better to withdraw and establish new defensive lines than sacrifice irreplaceable armor in unwinnable engagements. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 brought Fireflies into their final major engagement of the European War. British and Canadian force, crossing the river as part of Operation Plunder, encountered German positions on the eastern bank, where remaining Wehrmacht armour attempted to contain the bridgeheads. The Fireflies, crossing on pontoon bridges and establishing positions on the east bank, provided anti-tank overwatch that German armour could not effectively counter. Near the town of Ries, German forces committed their last operational Panthers in a counterattack intended to destroy British bridgehead positions. The attack, launched at dawn on March 25th, initially achieved surprise and penetrated British forward positions, but as Panthers advanced toward the river crossings, they entered engagement zones dominated by Firefly positions established specifically to counter such attacks. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. 11 Panthers committed to the attack, 7 were destroyed by Firefly fire at range between 800 and 1500 meters. The survivors withdrew after, recognizing the attack could not succeed against prepared British anti-tank positions. This engagement, among the last significant Panther versus Firefly battles of the war, ended with complete British tactical victory at minimal cost. April brought the final collapse of German resistance in northwest Europe. British armoured units, advancing deep into Germany, encountered scattered resistance from units that retained some combat capability but lacked fuel, ammunition, and cohesion to conduct effective operations. Fireflies, by this stage, were engaging targets of opportunity rather than participating in major armoured battles. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, with Firefly-equipped regiments positioned across northern Germany. Post-war analysis examined Firefly combat performance in detail. British researchers compiled data from unit records, crew reports, and German documents captured after surrender. The statistics confirmed what battlefield experience had demonstrated. Fireflies achieved higher kill ratios than any other British armoured vehicle, destroyed more German heavy armour per vehicle lost than any comparable Allied tank, maintained operational readiness comparable to standard Shermans, despite mounting a much larger gun, and forced German tactical adaptations that reduced overall Wehrmacht armoured effectiveness. One particularly revealing statistic emerged from this analysis. Of approximately 2,100 Fireflies produced, roughly 1,300 saw combat in northwest Europe between June 1944 and May 1945. These vehicles were credited with over 3,000 confirmed German armour kills, an average of roughly 2.3 kills per Firefly deployed. By comparison, standard 75mm Shermans in British service averaged approximately 0.8 confirmed kills per vehicle. This disparity reflected both the Firefly's superior anti-armour capability and British tactical employment that positioned these vehicles where they could maximise effectiveness. Fireflies were not general-purpose tanks. They were specialised tank destroyers that excelled in their designed role of engaging and defeating German armour at extended ranges. German technical intelligence, examining captured Fireflies after the war, produced assessments acknowledging British engineering success. A report from German ordnance personnel working with Allied occupation forces noted that the Firefly conversion demonstrated superior practical engineering, achieving maximum combat effectiveness through intelligent use of available resources. The report contrasted this with German tendency to pursue theoretical perfection regardless of production complexity or resource requirements. This assessment reflected broader understanding emerging from Germany's defeat. German armor design had emphasized individual vehicle superiority, accepting production complexity and logistical burden to achieve technical advantages. The Firefly demonstrated an alternative approach: take a reliable, mass-produced platform and upgrade its primary weapon to match or exceed enemy capabilities. The result was a vehicle that could be produced in adequate numbers, maintained with available resources, and employed effectively by trained but not exceptional crews. The Sherman Firefly was a British modification of the American Sherman tank that mounted a powerful Dick-Sept Pounder anti-tank gun, creating a weapon capable of defeating any German tank during World War II. This hybrid design represented a pragmatic solution to Britain's desperate need for effective anti-tank capability. The Firefly's Dick-Sept Pounder gun could penetrate 180 mm of armour at 000 meters, exceeding the protection of any German tank, including the Tiger and Panther. This gave British crews a decisive advantage after years of facing superior German armour with inadequate weapons. German tank commanders feared Fireflies above all other Allied tanks and prioritised their immediate destruction in every engagement. Britain's approach contrasted sharply with German tank development philosophy. While Germany invested enormous resources in sophisticated heavy tanks like the Tiger and King Tiger vehicles, with impressive specifications, but catastrophic reliability, Britain modified existing Sherman tanks with available guns. This created weapons that were strategically decisive because they could be produced in meaningful numbers and maintained under field conditions. The Firefly maintained the Sherman's excellent mechanical reliability, with operational readiness rates typically exceeding 75% even during intensive combat. This reliability, combined with lethal firepower, forced German armoured doctrine to become defensive and cautious, losing the flexibility and initiative that had previously characterized Wehrmacht operations. Canadian forces employed Fireflies with equal effectiveness alongside British units. Soviet force received limited numbers through Lend-Lease, but found them less suitable for their mobile warfare doctrine, preferring the Trentkont's mobility and Eisder's heavy armour for breakthrough operations. The Firefly's strategic impact extended beyond direct combat results. It demonstrated that specialized variants of reliable platforms could match or exceed purpose-built designs, a principle that would influence post-war tank development worldwide. By combining American mass production with British weapon design, the Firefly proved Allied cooperation could produce decisive battlefield advantage through reliable execution of essential combat tasks. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.